Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. We've got a whole lot to get to today, so prepare for a bunch of speddy uppy bits, because there was a whole lot of things that I needed to get done, and would rather condense all of this mundane stuff to a single episode, but I feel like it's important to keep you updated with all the stupidity that has happened around our Mars infrastructure setup. So here we are getting ready to detach the gray resupply pod. That is the one that brings mostly liquid fuel, but also a little bit of life support. We need that docking port clear for our new habitat section. So we're going to undock it, and I would have liked to have that docking extension that is attached to it currently. Attached to the front for easy access docking to our Mars Drop Lab base, which would make things surprisingly easy to fit resupply pods. I worry that they're a little too broad to fit in between the two solar towers, so we do actually kind of need this thing. Anyway, we've got to toggle RCS and SAS on with an 8-minute time delay as we slowly go ahead and back ourselves up from the docking port. So all of that, at least when we are connected to the lab, we did not have a delay because it's got a crewable part in there. So it's all just a little weird, when we have a delay to deal with and when we don't. So the very first step, at least my plan anyway, was to dock that docking extender to another docking port here on the station. I think the bottom of the life support tank at the other end of the station would have been a good place to do that. It's got tapered edges, and I think we can fit. We did barely fit the Odyssey, the little craft docked to the side of the station there, on that docking extender when we were short a single docking port, and then undock the main craft from it, and then redock to the docking extender straight on the nose of this resupply pod for a much easier access and use. So I started out the day by very much taking my time and operating on a single axis at a time. As you can see here clearly, we were making a pretty solid approach. Now we just have to get turned around. That is going to give us a little bit of wayward velocity, and then even things out and readjust our approach again before trying to get this docking port shoved on here, which really went a whole lot smoother than I expected it to be, considering it's not only off axis but quite blind and at a really weird angle, but at least we had really good visibility, and we lucked out in some decent control axes for it. So we'll back off our approach a little bit and then get ourselves angled in. I didn't really want to have time to either set as target or do control from here, because both of those would have existed on an 8-minute delay. Anyway, so here we are making our approach, and one of the very few times I'll turn you over to Old B. Alright, so just back up a little bit. Oh man, this is going to be a really interesting fit. Although I think it'll work. From this angle, that really does not look like it's going to fit, but I think it's just a product of our angle, seeing as how we're still moving in. Yeah, we got some room there. A little bit of a nudge. All right, just off to the side. Find the correct key, Crash. Come on. Yeah, I think it's actually going to let us do this. Oh, there's some magnets. Come on, magnets. All right, just get it docked. Oh, maybe we can't. No. Maybe? Magnets. Come on, do your thing. Oh, docked! Oh, come on. No! Oh boy. We just broke Harmonia Station. Oh. Really? All that time we spent moving all these science experiments and everything like that around, and we just tore it clean off. Why was that the place where it broke? I mean, if it broke the pod off, I could almost understand from the docking port, but why? Why here? Ah, all right. We do kind of need the supplies that are in this life support tank. God, we're gonna have to get rid of something here because we need to move stuff, and we have one free docking port. We need it for the habitat. So I guess decouple this node. It's got some mass now, so at least maybe it won't go all spinny wobbles. And oh boy, this is gonna take some thinking about things, I suppose. Alright, well, we'll get back into a little bit of sped up footage because we did have a whole lot of waiting to do with the signal delay, but we did in fact get that junky thing undocked, in which case we had to return on our RCS and SAS, which took a little bit of time as it was floating away from us at pretty decent speed, but we were able to actually catch up with the dumb thing and get ourselves docked to it. That part was actually pretty easy. We'll then transfer a bunch of the life support into the resupply pod itself, more for weight balance than anything else. And then I actually did hit decouple node on the sciencey bits at the opposite end, that little now useless tank, so as to free up a docking port at the end of the resupply pod. It, however, did not undock. It just kind of sat there, doing nothing. Small attempt was made to wiggle it off, but after switching to Harmonia Station and then switching back, it exploded and scattered debris all over the place. How predictable. So we only have this one docking port for right now, and we do need to preserve the supplies that are in this life support tank. They will be greatly needed. All the other life support tanks on the entire station are full as hell, and which is nice because it means the next crew coming up will probably have about 4 years of life support supplies waiting for them, which is quite necessary. And so we need to figure out what to do with this life support pod. Dock it right here and then wait, and then move it later is the general consensus. It is, however, behaving like a ridiculously heavy pendulum that we can't do very much with. But eventually, after a couple of little bouts of scraping paint, nudging the station, hitting time warp to stop the rotation of the station, and then finally backing off and making a nice slower approach, and I do mean eventually. This did take a whole lot of time with all of that mass up there at the front and actually absolutely no control authority on it, did make for a very wiggly wobbly, extra stupid time docking this thing. And quite honestly, I was getting a mite bit frustrated with exactly how well a lot of this seemingly mundane routine activities have been getting as of late. But I guess that's my luck, and I guess that's what also happens when you really try to rush through your daily bouts of Kerbal Space Program, because you finally found a half an hour to do something, and you want to just see how much you can get done in a half hour. So recording of all this was spaced out over about 4 days, so I do apologize that the episode is late. But there were lots of dumb things to get done that I didn't want to space out over 2 or 3 episodes, although this docking alone would have taken up more than enough time to be its own episode. However, language filter, I suppose, was the restrictive barrier. Anyway, we'll go ahead and slow down the footage just a little bit, because this approach took probably 15 minutes in real time. That's why it took nearly 20 whole seconds here in sped up footage. But when you finally calm down, take things easy, go nice and slow, you get a real nice dock. Excellent. So then it was just a matter of transferring some stuff out of the primary resupply pod back into wherever it would go, trying to find any other place besides that dumb life support tank that I have been trying to get rid of for literally years now. We just can't seem to free up the space. So we'll get as much mass out of the resupply pod as possible. Its most important cargo is the docking adapter and what little fuel it can bring out to our Mars drop base. It's going to deposit what it can there and then deorbit itself so that we can be free of that thing that has been taking up space for far, far too long, I guess. I don't know why I included all the resource transfer bits. I guess this part could have been breezed over a little more delicately. I don't even know what word I'm looking for. Anyway, a last check of the station resources as they are at present, and then we will rebalance some fuel in the resupply pod itself before undocking it and just letting it drift away. We will come back to this at a later time. We do have some things to deal with as far as the Mars drop base before we can return our attention to this thing, i.e., let's lower its orbit. But first, we need to deal with our new habitat, which is captured but in a highly eccentric orbit. So it actually has a rendezvous that will happen very soon. We were lucky enough to capture into this orbit and make a next pass intercept with Harmonia Station. We just have to make a very small correction at our ascending or descending node, whichever it is, to line ourselves up a little bit. So we're just going to take a very quick named quick save in case things go absolutely ridiculous. And I'm pretty sure I did hit the control from here on the docking port, that is the center, and we want to keep some runtime off the engines, considering this thing is just 20 some odd meters per second. We'll go ahead and do it on the back of thrusters, and it looks like no, I did not hit the control from here. So while we're waiting for that command to go through, we will be making this adjustment, watching our separation at closest approach go way the hell down. We're actually, yeah, we can delete that, get ourselves within just a couple of 100 meters on RCS, and then eventually here, once things stop going all wibbly wobbly, we will set our node to match velocities at closest approach, 854 meters per second burn in 2 hours. I think we've got somewhere north of 2 kilometers per second left in our capture stage here, which should the engine not fail is plenty to get us to where we need to be. Unfortunately, we do need to keep the capture stage attached until a crew can arrive, because these solar panels that are attached to it here need to be relocated onto the station. Now more so than ever, because the last section that had the solar panels attached to it magically broke off for no real reason whatsoever. We're going to try to see what happens if we stop using Mech Jeb Smart ASS, and we'll light our engine just a little too late, but we'll also try to get in on some thrusters here. So there is a bit of a wiggle. The gimbal on the engine is still down to about a degree or so, so I do really wonder if this thing is off balance, and we overshot the mark by like a lot. I grossly overestimated how powerful our engine was, but I was able to make sure that we were still on a nice line for the station, and only about 50 meters per second difference in delta V, which for sake of urgency we'll use the main engine to correct for before jumping back onto RCS only to give ourselves a very solid approach. We're just watching that separation at closest approach figure start to go way the hell down. Oh yeah, 50 meters. That's good, and now we just wait. Harmonia, seemingly, despite being way out of the atmosphere here at Mars, is below the clouds. It will slowly make its emergence as we very slowly make our approach. I did not want to screw this one up, so I just went and got myself a soda and let it hang out for a little while. So we only have one docking port really to choose from, but we do need to get that tank out of the way so that we can get this habitat attached properly. And I have sped this footage way the hell up and removed the sound, because no one needs to hear the string of words that I would tie together for about the next 45 minutes of my life. And I'm really sure it would get me banned from several online platforms were this audio to be released in any form whatsoever. Very creative linguistics, if I do say so myself. Anyway, so if that's not a spoiler, I don't really know how else I can ruin this episode for you, other than making you watch it. So we're going to first make our approach. The idea here was to dock the life support tank to one of our lateral docking ports here on the habitat module, and then simply rotate ourselves 90 degrees and go in for docking on the primary port at the top of the habitat. So the very first approach was actually fairly well balanced and pretty easy to do eventually once I calmed down and actually started taking my time to do things and was patient about things. We were able to pivot ourselves onto this docking port at some point. There it is, docked, and now we're going to get as much resource out of that life support supply pod as we possibly can, because we want to keep as much of our mass centered around where we actually have thrusters as we can. But even with fully topping off the life support supplies of the habitat itself, did not nearly drain the pod at all. So in some last-ditch effort, we'll transfer as much as we can into the parts of the pod closest to the habitat itself, and here's where the absolute fun began. So we've sped it up a whole bunch. Once again, we had to take time to enable RCS and SAS, and the drifting away from the station, I think, is what really did this whole project in for me. Now, because of the offset center of mass relative to our thrusters, thanks to a life support pod that I really wanted to get rid of years and years ago, this became absolutely like the worst experience docking ever. And this is probably something I should have tested for. Although the lab does fit in there, going straight onto docking just doesn't happen, so we can tend to bounce around a lot. And because of this bouncing or nudging the station off to the side with the help of those extended, or those I don't know, the Mark II crew cabin bits, we were never able to actually get a solid approach on Harmonia Station at all. Much to my extraordinary frustration, because this was how the station is supposed to be assembled, and it really just doesn't matter how well I make the approach. Any corrections are deeply offset by that life support tank. Yeah, there's another bounce. Lots of curse words, frustration, anger, pounding on the table, and eventually a break for a drink or 5, which after 3, maybe 4 more attempts, or maybe it was 4 attempts total. This is what I thought was honestly the best attempt ever. We were coming in nice and straight. We had things lined up. We made our contact, and then everything goes off, and the station just bounces. Even trying to pivot to keep those docking ports lined up really just made things go all completely screwy. But I was not yet that easily deterred. I did try to salvage the whole situation and get ourselves lined up again, hoping that maybe if I could adjust my primary axis by going laterally through the heaviest part, it would work. But no, it's just a little bit too tight of a fit, it turns out. So the new plan, to be finalized when a crew actually does show up, and I guess, no, I did attempt it one more time, and this one actually looked really good. Now that I'm watching it in post, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I can see where I'm a little bit off, but I was honestly getting extremely angry. Yeah, I remember this. Nudge, nope, nudge, nope. It just, so frustrating to watch, and every little correction did the RCS compensating, sent us either backwards or to a completely different side. But we were having one hell of a time getting this thing to fit. I thought it was fitting. It was not fitting. It was pivoting. And this might have been when I just said, you know what, we're done here. And we're going to go on and we're going to do something else, because I've got like 4 more things that I have to do, and not any more time in which to do them. So the new plan, to be finalized when a crew finally shows up, we're just going to dock this on one of its side ports for now, to this docking port, and when a crew gets here, hopefully we can drain the rest of that useless life support tank. We can remove the solar panels from the capture stage. we can drain the capture stage, and then finally jettison the capture stage, at which point we will undock the habitat module, hopefully with the help of Perseus or whatever ship comes out to dock it. We will flip it 90 degrees and then dock it to its bottom docking port that is currently attached to its transfer stage, and then attach it that way. So at least we get the form factor of what we're looking for, kinda, even if it's on there a little upside down, because I really should have practiced this docking in simulations before trying to attempt it out here at Mars, and just really having quite an interesting time of it. So I did try to dock it with the facing port and the life support pod facing out. That'll make it easier to get rid of, and honestly made the docking approach a whole lot easier working through this axis. But eventually, after many nudges and scraping paints and very interesting use of the English language, we got it docked. In a weird way, but we can still deploy our solar panels. Anyway, carrying very swiftly along, and all of this is, again, very sped up footage because it's entirely uninteresting. This is our Mars drop base that I royally screwed up the orbital insertion, and by not counting the ignitions left on the HG3, the Hoff upper stage. We had one. I thought we had at least two. We didn't. So we are in a very high, very eccentric orbit, 25 million meters by what was initially 1.5 million, although we are out here at our apoapsis using our RCS to lower that periapsis to inside Mars's atmosphere. We don't have a whole lot of fuel on this thing. It was basically just enough to provide RCS control during the trip over and for fine-tuning maneuvers and assisting with docking. But I think it's much better used putting this in a much lower orbit where our resupply pods will have a much easier time getting to it. As they are right now, we have one resupply pod in a very eccentric orbit, but it also can aero brake down to something lower, but it was also offset by many degrees relative. We have a resupply pod that's been in orbit, but its apoapsis is about 90 degrees offset from the base's apoapsis. Another interesting problem here that you may have noticed after we have completed our first successful aero braking pass is that both rovers are all screwy looking. I guess quick loading or jumping to it from Kerbal Alarm Clock. Anyway, I've seen this problem happen before. It happened with our old Venus station, the one that most recently failed, not the one that we just built. It would just randomly spawn all the parts inside the center tank, which was extraordinarily frustrating, but not that hard to fix. I've kind of decided that, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this right now. I'm going to make these many aero braking passes, and then worry about adjusting the save file to fix this thing, so that the rovers are not extraordinarily weirdly discombobulated, because that's just... well, it's just odd is what it is. And yeah, like I said before, it's not a huge deal to fix. It's just frustrating that KSP keeps doing these silly things to us that seem entirely unnecessary. I shouldn't have to deal with disembodied limbs of rovers dangling off of my drop base at any random given time. Anyway, this is like, what, our third pass? Or is it fourth? I lost count. I also got distracted. I shouldn't really be blamed for these things. We've basically turned the RCS system off for most of this because we don't really need to be facing any particular way. And by turned RCS off, I mean I've locked the tank, which is why Mech Jeb is showing 0 delta V for the whole thing. And we just followed it around for a couple orbits, letting that apoapsis come down to a much more comfortable level. In this case, I think we have... maybe one more pass? No, that would be our last pass, because aero braking again at that altitude would be a deorbit maneuver. So once we get out here to our periapsis, we are actually going to kick the thrusters back on. No, this is our last pass. Now we're in the last pass. Anyway, yeah, we're going to come out of here at like 900 something kilometer apogee, and another pass from this altitude would be a deorbit maneuver. So we're going to warp out to Apoapsis. We are going to unlock our RCS propellant, and we are going to make an adjustment out here to raise our periapsis outside of the atmosphere, having successfully put our Mars base in what is a very easy orbit. We could actually land it from this orbit, but I think we'll use RCS fuel to adjust it further after we get a pod out here. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really do appreciate it, and I will see all of you in the next one. So until then, see you later.